Welcome to A Christmas Bride for the Teacher, part of the Hearts and Hands Mail Order Bride Agency series by Indiana Wake and Belle Fiffer. Lynn travels west hoping for a fresh start with her sister and a new life as a schoolteacher. But when she grows close to a handsome fellow teacher, her sister warns her to stay away. As Christmas approaches and tensions rise, Lynn must decide who to trust, and whether love is worth the risk. Now sit back and enjoy A Christmas Bride for the Teacher. Copyright Indiana Wake and Belle Fiffer. A Christmas Bride for the Teacher by Indiana Wake and Belle Fiffer. Chapter 1. This job never got old. Even though Mary had several girls to talk to that day. 7 young women had come on the train from the East Coast and she had a few matched in her mind already. It didn't matter. She could still feel the excitement in her belly, the anticipation of a potential match. It was surprising at how easy it was for her to match women up with a prospective husband. Mary hadn't expected it to be so much fun, or how fulfilling it would be to her life. At least the family she loved and married into didn't call her eccentric. Her father would have, and he would have called her silly for even attempting something so ridiculous. But her in-laws, especially her loving husband, supported what she was doing and helped her whenever he could. Mary thanked the Lord that she had found a partner as perfect and loving as Gareth. This day, however, was still going to be a long day. Mary had already spoken to Harriet, and she had been sent to stay with the Maffey siblings. Even from Harriet's letter, Mary had felt she would be right for Christian. When she met her, she was sure. Christian didn't even know he needed someone, but Mary intended to heal his heart. Harriet had a temperament that could easily work with Christian. The man needed a saint and Harriet was perfect, and though she wouldn't realize it at first, Christian was perfect for her. Gareth was taking Lorna up to Matthew's horse breeding ranch to work as one of his servants. Matthew knew he wanted Lorna as his wife, but Lorna needed to find that out for herself. And working for her future husband would ease her into the idea of being in his company frequently. Once again Mary had a feeling about the two of them. That they were meant to be, she just hoped that they would figure it out too. Now, it was time for the next girl. And Mary had a pretty good idea who would be the perfect match for her. She was rearranging the letters from the girl in question on the table when the door opened and a petite young woman with flame-colored hair and a curvy frame came into the room. The green dress and hat she wore went perfectly with her hair, and brought out the smattering of freckles across her nose and cheeks. She was certainly a beautiful woman. Mary stood and smiled at her as she approached. "Good afternoon. It's Lynn, isn't it?" "Yes." The girl held out a hand and shook Mary's with a firm grip. "Lynn Vardy. And you're Mary Stanier?" "I certainly am. It's nice to finally put a face to the name." Mary gestured for Lynn to follow her. "Come on over. I don't bite." Lynn laughed. She had a very healthy laugh. As she took a seat, rearranging her skirts about her, Mary found herself surveying Lynn with curiosity. From what she had gathered from the letters the two of them had passed, Lynn was a shy, passive, and unhappy young woman. She had been held very firmly under her parents' thumb but desperately wanted to get out. Shy and passive were certainly neither of those words that Lynn was displaying now. She looked and sounded confident, carefree, happy. Just getting away from her domineering parents seemed to have done her the world of good. Mary sat back down, brushing her hair behind her ear as Lynn took the pin out and took off her hat, sticking the pin back into the fabric. "How are you finding San Francisco so far?" "It's stunning," Lynn gushed. "It's better than I thought it would be. I mean," a red flush crept up her cheeks, "I wasn't expecting anything bad. I just..." Mary held up a hand and laughed. Calm yourself. It's fine. I went through the same thing when I first came here. It's easy to have that kind of reaction. Oh. Lynn looked a little relieved. How long have you been here? Nearly a year. I came here with my new husband for a new life. It seems to have turned out well for you. Then Mary realized Lynn was giving her dress a pointed look. She looked down and saw the remains of slobber from Elijah on her shoulder and chest. Mary laughed. Sorry about that. My son likes to think he's a slug. He wipes his face across me and leaves a trail behind. I have been so rushed I forgot to change. I guess life certainly changes when children come into the picture. It definitely does. Mary beamed. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Lynn smiled back. There was a small dimple in her cheek when she smiled. My sister keeps saying the same thing. Her twins are nearly 2. Your sister's Greta Cornell, didn't you say? Yes. Lynn sighed. She and Wayne, my brother-in-law, ran out here to get married. And Greta kept going on about how beautiful it was in San Francisco, how much better the life was. She shrugged. I guess I wanted something like that. Something resembling idyllic. Is that selfish of me? Not at all. It's perfectly normal to want something better. Mary sat back, tapping her pencil on her pad. Did your sister and her husband know each other before they came out to San Francisco? Yes. They wanted to marry back east, but Lynn bit her lip. My parents were against it. They don't like Wayne at all. So, the two of them ran away. That had Mary sitting up. While she didn't have the perfect parental examples to go from in her own life, she was aware that parents often disliked potential in-laws for good reason. They had a gut instinct that wasn't often wrong. Is there anything I should be concerned about, Lynn? How do you mean? Because if you're going to live with your sister and her family, I want to know that you're going to be safe. You think Wayne might hurt me? Lynn laughed. Oh, don't worry about Wayne. He's a gentle giant. An absolute sweetheart. He had a bad upbringing and practically all his family are in jail, which was why my parents didn't like him. Then again, she added as she made a face. My parents wouldn't like any man of our choosing. Ah. Mary knew these type of people all too well. They would rather have you and Greta marry someone who was of their choice. Someone they knew could keep you in line. Precisely. They were trying to arrange a marriage for me, which is why I wanted to come out when I did. I detest the man they had picked out. He was about to become a grandfather. Lynn scowled. I'm 22. I may not be the freshest daisy in the field, but I'm not out of the field completely. Mary burst out laughing. That is the best analogy I've ever heard. She scribbled down on her notepad. Well, you shouldn't have too much trouble finding a husband here, if you want one. Plenty of men have written in asking for a wife, and you fit the criteria for many of them. Lynn arched an eyebrow. So, I'm spoiled for choice, am I? Not necessarily. I may have a general idea of who would be perfect for you, but you need to find out for yourself. I thought you were the matchmaker. I am. But while I can push people in the right general direction, I can't force them to marry. That's up to the parties concerned. Lynn sighed. You're basically saying I shouldn't get my hopes up. No, not exactly. I'm saying I'm not like your parents. You and the man involved will decide if this is right for you. If not, we try again. Mary looked at the clock. My husband will take you over to Greta's once he's got back. While you wait, perhaps you would like some lunch? My mother-in-law is making soup and some bread. It's delicious, so you should make the most of it. Lynn smiled. Thank you. I am rather famished. She stood, pausing as she reached for her hat. Do you think I'll be able to find a husband out here, Mary? Even with her newfound confidence, the girl was still unsure of herself. Mary knew exactly how she felt. She patted her arm. I know you will, she said warmly. Whether through me or on your own, you will. Trust me. Chapter 2. Not for the first time, Lynn wondered what she had got herself into. Being told that she was to marry a man as old as her father because he had a lot of money had pushed her into making this rash decision. Half of the time she was delighted at her choice, the rest she was terrified. Now she was in San Francisco, Lynn couldn't escape the worry. The train journey had been exciting and terrifying. They had been stopped and robbed several times, but her group had been lucky not to lose anything. They didn't really have a lot to lose. The journey had been hair-raising, to say the least. The women Lynn had come over with were a nice bunch. Lynn liked them. They were nervous about the journey, but all of them were warm and friendly. It hadn't taken much for Lynn to relax and start smiling again. She couldn't remember the last time when she had smiled and laughed, and it hadn't been forced. When things went wrong, they all stood together, and that had helped Lynn with her confidence. If they could get through this, they could get through anything. They were genuine, friendly, and caring. There had been a lot of falsehood in Lynn's family life. She hated it. Even though she was now here, soon to be reunited with her older sister, Lynn could still feel a sense of unease. She had seen Mary's advert for brides wanted in San Francisco by chance, but the thought of marrying after running away from marriage in the first place. Lynn didn't know what to think about it. Had she jumped from the frying pan into the fire? It didn't matter, she was here. She would have to grit her teeth and get on with it, or maybe she could simply live her own life without a husband. That second option felt very gray and gloomy. How would she survive? It was mid-afternoon when Gareth Stanier came back from his errand to take Lynn over to her sister and brother-in-law's home on the other side of the church. The schoolhouse was attached to the church land, and Greta lived just on the other side of the fence, backing onto a stretch of prairie that seemed to go on for miles. Lynn couldn't stop staring at it in wonder as Gareth drove the wagon along the track by the church fence. Greta had certainly done well for herself. She and Wayne were living very comfortably, considering Wayne's salary. Her sister was waiting on the porch for her. Lynn could hardly believe it was the same woman who had left 4 years before. Greta's figure was a little fuller and her red hair was a little more rustic-colored, but her eyes were shining, her skin was a golden brown, and there was a permanent smile on her face. She practically flew off the porch as Lynn jumped off the wagon and the sisters reunited with hugs and tears. Letters didn't compare to seeing her sister in the flesh. Gareth put Lynn's bags by the door and left, giving them a wave as he drove away. Greta barely noticed, dragging Lynn inside. They set Lynn up in the spare room, and then Greta proudly showed Lynn her twins, John and Ronnie. The little boys squawked and laughed when they saw Lynn, Ronnie coming over to give her a hug as soon as he saw her. Lynn's heart melted when she saw them. They were adorable. There was one thing Lynn had forgotten about Greta, and that was Greta could talk for the country. She kept on talking, barely letting Lynn get a word in edgeways. Lynn was happy with that. She could feel the tiredness set in, and her focus was on Ronnie once he climbed into her lap and kept wriggling. It wasn't until Greta gasped loudly that Lynn realized it had got dark outside. Goodness, I completely forgot about the time. Come on, you two, it's bedtime. She held up a hand as both children started whining. You know the rule, once it gets dark, you go to bed. You've had your dinner and you've had playtime. Now it's bedtime. She scooped each child up in both arms. Come on, say goodnight to Auntie Lynn. Lynn settled back as Greta left the room, both wriggling boys in tow. Now she was aware it was dark, she could feel the tiredness setting in. Her eyes fluttered closed even as she shivered. The room had suddenly got a lot colder. When she opened her eyes again, Greta had finished building the fire. It burned brightly, and it warmed up the room. Greta picked up a blanket and laid it over her sister's lap, giving her a soft smile. There you go. That will keep you warm. Thank you. Lynn covered a yawn and sat up. I'm sorry, I had no idea I was that tired. I'm not surprised. It is a long journey. And you have to keep one eye open the whole time. Was it like that with you? Pretty much. Greta sat beside her, tugging the pins out of her hair. Her long curls bounced about her shoulders. I'm sorry about the weather. I had no idea it was going to be this cold. It's not normally as cold as this. I shouldn't be surprised. Christmas is only weeks away. Greta shuddered. Oh, don't remind me. Why? You used to love Christmas. Well, now I'm a mother. And now I know why Mother kept complaining about Christmas Day and fixing the dinner. It's hard work. Lynn burst out laughing. I don't know what Mother was complaining about. She never made Christmas dinner. That was Isabel and Mavis. They always put on a fantastic spread. Mother would constantly hover over them, telling them what to do. Greta giggled. And they ignored her anyway. But I know how they feel when you've got other things to do as well as concentrate on the dinner. I just about managed it last Christmas, and the one before that. This year, I might make Wayne do it. He's a very good cook. Lynn hadn't heard of a man who could cook. It was unheard of back home. You expect him to cook after working all day? He won't be teaching on Christmas Day. Greta dropped her collection of pins on the table at her elbow and fluffed out her hair. Lynn took a closer look at her sister. She was looking older, more world-weary, but Greta was looking better than she had done before. Happier, certainly. How are you two doing? Lynn asked. 2 children and 4 years out here, you look like San Francisco has done you good. It has. Greta beamed and stretched her arms above her head with a happy sigh. It feels perfect not to have my parents looking over my shoulder every second of every day. I feel. I don't know, lighter. That I can tell. You used to look so stressed, so worn out. Lynn grinned. Now, you still look tired. Charming. But you look better than I've ever seen you. Greta laughed. Thank you. Hopefully, the same will happen to you. She chucked Lynn's chin. You look exactly the same as I did when I first came out here. In a few weeks, that frown will be completely wiped away and you'll be glowing. I hope so. I can't wait to get started. To have a job for the first time in my life. That was the main thing Lynn was looking forward to. Having money was one thing, but knowing it had been earned and she could do what she wished with it, made it even better. Lynn wanted to do that. She didn't care what job she had, within reason, as long as she could have money she had earned for herself in her hand. Well, there are plenty of jobs around town, Greta said. You'll be spoilt for choice. I know, maybe Wayne can find you a job to do at the schoolhouse. What? Lynn spluttered. I can't teach to save my life. Greta laughed and nudged her sister's leg. Don't fret so much. I didn't say you would be a teacher. More like custodian, keeping an eye on the children, helping with the meals. Something like that. Wayne would appreciate the help and I know Jonathan would. Jonathan? Oh, he's the self-appointed headmaster of the school. Was there a slight frown behind Greta's eyes? He started up the schoolhouse 6 years ago. The school is thriving because of him. Even with the frown, there was a slight wistful note in her voice. Lynn sat up. What was going on there? Did Greta have some slight admiration for the headmaster? Was it just that? That's good. Lynn murmured. I might just do that. I want to do something with children. It was then that they heard the front door opening and closing, voices in the hallway. Greta grinned and stood. Well, you can ask him now. She approached the door as a huge, hulking man with blonde hair appeared, shrugging out of his coat. Hey, honey. Goodness, it's cold out there now. I can tell. Greta shivered as she kissed his cheek and took his coat. You're ice cold. But I've got a visitor who should warm you up. Lynn stood, dropping the blanket onto the couch. She smoothed her hands down her skirts and smiled. Wayne's eyes landed on her curiously, and then widened in recognition. Lynn? Hey, Wayne. Wayne's mouth dropped open. Then he burst out laughing as he strode across the room, pulling Lynn into a bear hug that felt like Lynn was being squeezed to death. My God, Lynn. I barely recognized you. Wayne drew back and looked Lynn over, his eyes shining. My, you look so grown up. Lynn laughed. I should hope so. I was barely 18 when you last saw me. She prodded him affectionately in the belly. You're looking well, Wayne. I know. Wayne indicated his wife, love glowing in his face. And it's all because of this lovely lady. Flatterer, Greta teased. Then her voice faded and changed tone. Oh, Jonathan. I had no idea you were here. Lynn looked around Wayne. And she suddenly forgot how to breathe. A tall man loomed in the doorway, a sheaf of papers in a file under his arm. His short dark hair was going silver and there was a dusting of a beard across his jaw. Even across the room, Lynn could see how blue his eyes were. They were on her, unblinking. It was so intense that she felt lightheaded. Whoa. What was she doing? Wayne cleared his throat. Beg pardon, Greta. Jonathan was just helping me bring a few things back. Jonathan, he turned to the other man, this is Greta's sister, Lynn. She's just moved here. Lynn, this is my colleague and our neighbor, Jonathan Davy. Lynn felt like her voice had escaped her. She swallowed hard and dropped a quick curtsy, lowering her eyes to the ground. Hello, she mumbled. Miss Lynn. That was one gorgeous voice. The timbre shivered up Lynn's spine. Jonathan hesitated. Listen, if I'm interrupting, I can leave. Nonsense, you can't, Wayne interjected. We need to do this marking by tomorrow. Do you mind if Jonathan stays for supper, Greta? Of course not. Greta smiled, but it looked a little strained. Lynn, would you mind lending a hand? And don't talk too loudly, you two, the children are in bed. Jonathan grinned and put a finger to his lips. We'll be as quiet as mice. Greta snorted. I'll believe it when I see it. Then she practically stomped out the room. Lynn was confused as to the sudden change, but then concern for her sister disappeared as she looked at Jonathan, who was setting himself up at the table by the window with Wayne. He had long, slim fingers that seemed to move the papers around like he was playing music. Where had that comparison come from? Lynn shook herself and hurried out after her sister. Chapter 3. Lynn was beautiful. Jonathan knew about the women who had come as potential brides. After all, he had written his own letter requesting a bride and explaining what he wanted. That had been difficult, and Mary had told him to put down what he would like in his ideal woman. At first he couldn't decide. How could anyone? She had told him to close his eyes and just imagine. He had, and the letter had been an amazing experience. Only then he had gotten depressed. Surely, any real woman could never live up to his dreams. He never expected someone as lovely as Lynn. She was radiant, and lit up the room despite her nerves. Jonathan could hardly take his eyes off her. Even when he was marking papers with Wayne, his eyes were constantly pulled in her direction. Later on at supper he found his gaze constantly drawn to her, and he wondered if he would look rude as he gawked at the red-headed beauty. From the way Greta was glaring at him he guessed he was. If not rude, his behavior was certainly not that of a gentleman, and Greta wasn't pleased. Jonathan felt ashamed at first, but then the look Greta gave him was strange. It didn't come over as protective, more as jealous. Shaking off the feeling, he ignored her. This was nothing to do with Greta. Jonathan had wondered how he would react when he saw the bride Mary had promised would be perfect for him. Many scenarios had gone through his mind, but nothing prepared him for reality. The moment he saw her, his gut immediately said this was it. It felt like a sucker punch to the stomach. Somehow, Jonathan knew she was the one, that she would be the only woman he would ever love. He knew this was ridiculous. He didn't know her yet, and yet still the feeling was firm in his mind and in his heart. But instinct told him there was something in the way, something that Jonathan was sure was going to stop this dead in its tracks. Greta. Instinct told him she would want to stop this. That she would whisper into Lynn's ear, turning her against him. It told him Greta didn't want this happening. The longer the evening went on, the stronger Jonathan believed it. He could feel Greta's eyes boring into him, and he tried to keep his own off Lynn. He couldn't. When he left Wayne's home, instead of going home and to bed, Jonathan mounted his horse and headed into town. There was someone he always went to for advice, and Mary Stanier was always ready to give it, even at this hour. The mission station was quiet. There was barely any light showing through the slats. Everyone had to be in bed or about to go to bed. Jonathan knew he should go home, but he heard a noise inside, and so he knocked. The door opened and Mary herself peered blearily through the crack. Her eyes widened when she saw him. Jonathan. Sorry for disturbing you at this time. Jonathan grimaced. I didn't mean to bother you if you were sleeping. Not at all. Elijah's not sleeping, so I've ended up with the night shift. Mary opened the door wider. Come on in. Just keep your voice down, I don't want to wake the rest of the mission. Of course. Jonathan took off his hat and followed Mary inside. They padded down a long corridor and into the lounge at the far side of the mission station. It was the opposite end to the sleeping quarters. Even then, Jonathan could hear someone snoring heavily. Is there a pig in your yard? He asked before he could stop himself. Mary burst out laughing. clamping her hands over her mouth to quiet the noise, but even so, her shoulders were still shaking. Sorry, I shouldn't laugh. That's my father-in-law. He can't sleep with his mouth closed. How does his wife cope? Mary giggled again. I have no idea. But I'm glad Gareth hasn't inherited that from his father. The man is worth his weight in gold, but the snoring, it wakes me sometimes and we are 4 rooms down. Mary sat on the armchair near a glowing fire and gestured for Jonathan to sit across from her. Come, sit down and tell me what's on your mind. Thank you. Jonathan took a seat, turning his hat in his hands. Now he was feeling a little like a fool. Did you get anywhere with choosing a wife for me? Mary frowned. That was something you needed to discuss with me in the middle of the night? Sorry, humor me, Mary. Still looking a little perplexed, Mary sat back and tightened the belt around her waist. I think I'm making progress. Why? Because I want you to stop. I believe I've found the woman I want to marry. You believe? Jonathan felt his face going red. This was getting more and more embarrassing. It had felt like a good idea to come here and explain things when he first left Wayne's house. Now, Mary was giving him some strange looks. My heart says yes, but my head is telling me to take it slow. I don't want to ruin things. Mary gave him a small smile. It's understandable to be doubtful of your own emotions. But sometimes we know about our feelings just by one look. Did it happen with you? With me and Gareth? Attraction at first sight on my part, yes, but not love. That came later, once we got to know each other. Jonathan couldn't help but laugh. Coming from the resident matchmaker, that does sound a little odd. I know. Mary shrugged. But things aren't as idyllic as you might think. My father dominated everything before and not in a good way. Gareth was my way out. I cared for him from his letters, but he was different in person, at first. Did he know about your family? Of course, he did. And he was a sweetheart about it all. Mary sat forward. So, which of the girls has caught your eye? My neighbor's sister-in-law, Lynn. Lynn Vardy. Mary didn't look surprised. If anything, it was like she was expecting it. I had a feeling she would catch your eye. You've matched us up already? Not directly, but putting her in your path was all I needed to do. Mary spread her hands. There is a lot of things about her that would be perfect for you. You two just needed to be close enough to realize it. Jonathan hadn't realized that. But he had to admit that Mary's judgment with couples was better than he expected. When he wrote to Mary asking for a potential bride as he wanted to settle down and get married, Jonathan hadn't been sure what to expect or if Mary would be successful. It looked like Mary had picked very well. Just on our first meeting, I would definitely agree with you. He sighed, turning the brim of his hat over and over in his fingers. But it's not just about looks, is it? No. You would be a shallower person than I thought if you decided about your future wife just going on looks. Shallower? Mary giggled. We're all shallow in some cases, aren't we? Not all of us are perfect, not even me. Mary crossed her legs, smoothing her dress down. So, you want me to stop looking for a potential match and let you see how things go with Lynn? Sort of. Sort of. Now Mary was looking confused. I thought you were decided. I am, but, Jonathan stood and began to pace, tossing his hat onto his chair. I have no idea what she would think. I can't exactly jump at her with the words, "I want to marry you," within hours of meeting her. She would be scared off. Well, you would scare anyone if you said that seconds after laying eyes on them. Exactly. Jonathan ran his hands through his hair. I don't want a relationship to be based on simply a match and nothing more. I want it to have more substance to it. I want to build it up. Mary's expression said she understood perfectly what he meant. You want to make her fall in love with you. Essentially. Jonathan winced. You know what happened last time. 7 years ago. That was 7 years ago. And that shouldn't dictate what happens now. It might do. Jonathan had made a mistake the first time around. He didn't want it to happen again. He didn't want to lose the woman he knew was meant to be his wife. His gut said that Lynn was meant to be his, but Greta might have something to say about that. It won't. Mary stood and approached him, laying a hand on Jonathan's back. At the same time, don't do all the work. Let Lynn take the reins. She needs to do things in her own time. I know. Jonathan rubbed his hands over his face. I hope I can be patient. Mary smiled. Well, you can pass the time by looking through the letters I have from her, if you like. That should give you more insight as to who Lynn is. She prodded him in the side. And it will keep you busy. For how long? Jonathan grumbled. I don't want it to take too long. Mary laughed. Honestly, Jonathan, you need to exercise patience. You say that to your pupils, don't you? Yes. Then exercise it yourself. I'm sure you and Lynn will be married by Christmas. Jonathan stared at her. You're very optimistic about that. Mary winked. I have my moments. Chapter 4. Lynn. Lynn looked up. She had been so engrossed in organizing the books on the bookshelf that she hadn't noticed Wayne standing behind her. Huh. It's the end of the day. You can head home now. Oh. Lynn lowered the books to the table. Sorry, Wayne, I wasn't paying attention. I noticed. Wayne chuckled. You work harder than the teachers sometimes. Lynn smiled. Ever since Wayne and Jonathan had agreed that she could be the schoolhouse's librarian, she had been working tirelessly. The library had been a mess. Lynn started by cleaning some space and then sorting out the books they had. Some had needed gluing back together. A few she had to make new covers for, and some were a little damp, so she stood them up to air. After discussions with Wayne, Jonathan, and the other teachers, she had made a list of the books they needed to source. She had managed to persuade a few of the locals to help out the school. The carpenter had used some offcuts to build some shelves. Others had donated books and were sourcing more from relatives. In little more than a week, she had totally transformed the library and had increased the books on hand by 30%. Today she had received some new shelves and some tables and chairs that had been donated. They needed a few repairs and to be sanded down to make sure they were safe for the children. Once they were ready, more children could come to read or research in the library. Lynn barely had time to sit down, and she kept forgetting to eat her lunch. But she wouldn't have it any other way. Why do you work so hard? Wayne asked. Lynn shrugged. I love working with children. My parents said I wasn't to work as I had all the money I could ask for. I didn't need to work for it. She sighed and made a face. You cannot imagine how bored I was. Wayne grinned as he leaned against the door, folding his big arms. I think I can imagine, considering Greta kept complaining about the same thing. But she doesn't have a job now, Lynn pointed out. Sounds like she's not bothered. Lynn smiled. Wayne sighed. She worked all the way up to the birth, she wanted to work now, but she's focused on looking after the children, and me, right now. They need her. Lynn's heart softened. She had liked Wayne when she met him before they moved west. The more she got to know him, the more affection she had for her brother-in-law. He was a sweet, kind man, a devoted husband and father. Greta acted like the loving wife, but Lynn could see she had no idea how much of a good man Wayne was. Anyway, I'm heading off now. Wayne pushed off the door. Do you want to grab your coat and we can walk back? But I've still got a lot of things to sort out, Lynn protested. I don't want to leave it until tomorrow. Greta won't want you to walk back on your own. Down a hill? I'm hardly going to get kidnapped when she can clearly see the path from the schoolhouse to yours. Wayne shrugged. You know what Greta's like. I know. Lynn looked at the books that still needed to be stacked. But I've got this. I want to finish it. What's going on? Lynn paused when she heard the deep timbre of Jonathan Davy. The headmaster appeared in the doorway behind Wayne. He was still in his shirt sleeves and was carrying a file bursting with papers. Working late, again. Lynn wondered when the man ever got any sleep. He never left until after Lynn did, and Lynn always stayed late. I'm trying to get my sister-in-law to come home. Wayne spread his hands. She's just as stubborn as her sister. Does she need to come home right now? Well, Greta wants me to walk her home. Jonathan looked at Lynn, and Lynn shivered when she saw the warm look in his eyes. She had a sudden urge to run into his arms and enfold herself into his warmth. That had been the reaction she had experienced for the past week, and Lynn wasn't sure how to react to it. If Lynn wants to finish what she's doing, she can. Jonathan said evenly. I can walk her back. Lynn's mouth dropped open. Wayne looked a little perplexed. Really? Really, Jonathan chuckled. It's not exactly out of my way. Lynn could see Wayne was dithering. And she badly wanted to spend some time with Jonathan without her sister hovering around them. She gave Wayne a smile. I don't mind, Wayne. Jonathan will look after me. You go on home. Wayne was still looking torn. But he sighed and nodded. I'll let Greta know. See you back at the house, he added to Lynn before giving a wave and disappearing. Lynn turned to Jonathan, who still hadn't looked away from her. That look, those eyes, they were mesmerizing. Thank you, Lynn managed to stutter out. She always forgot how to speak around him. No problem. Jonathan indicated the papers in his hand. Let me finish up with these. That should be plenty of time for you. Then he was gone, and Lynn felt like the warmth had gone with him. She shook herself and concentrated on hurrying through her task of putting all the books in order. Now there was a job title to her name. Lynn wanted to take it seriously. The library was her domain, and she needed to get things in order, to continually improve it. The children were making things easy as they seemed to love it. As soon as the last book was put on the shelf, Lynn grabbed her coat and hat, tugging both on as she hurried out into the hall, nearly prodding her scalp with the hat pin. Jonathan was coming out of his office near the front door, now wearing a jacket and coat, his hat on over his silver hair. He gave Lynn a smile that she felt all the way down to her toes. Ready to go? Absolutely. Jonathan opened the door and let Lynn out first. She stepped outside and swayed backward as the wind hit her in the face. Whoa! She fell back, and arms went around her. Looking up, Lynn found herself staring up at Jonathan. His hands were on her shoulders steadying her. His face was very close. Then Jonathan's cheeks, his face half bathed in light, went red and he carefully righted her again. Careful. His tone was light despite his red face. Quickly, he let her go and turned to close the schoolhouse door, locking up. You need to watch that wind. I noticed. Lynn shivered and burrowed into her coat. It's so cold and so strong. San Francisco is meant to be warm at this time of year, but there are times when the cold wind rockets through. Jonathan indicated the hill the church and the schoolhouse stood on. This hillside turns into a bit of a wind tunnel. Lynn had certainly noticed that. Another gust of wind almost knocked her off her feet, but she managed to catch her balance. Jonathan turned to her and held an arm. Want to hang on to me? Lynn hesitated. In all this time, she had never touched Jonathan. They had been in the same room many times and they talked, but Jonathan never made to touch her, apart from a moment before to keep her on her feet. Lynn could feel her hand tingling in anticipation. She smiled at him and slid her hand into the crook of his elbow. It was warm and very solid. Muscles flexed under her fingers. Thank you. Jonathan cleared his throat, and they made their way down the hill. It was slow going, the wind pushed at them, slowing their progress, and it had been raining during the day. The ground was still soft and muddy. Lynn could feel her feet slipping from under her, which caused her to hold on to Jonathan a little tighter. From the way his arm tightened, he wasn't planning on letting go. He helped her over a rocky part of the path before they walked on, coming to shelter underneath some trees. How are you liking your new life? He asked. Lynn smiled at him. I love it and I feel better, too. Greta was right. You do appreciate the change. Before she could stop herself, Lynn leaned into him. His shoulder was very warm. It's so freeing not having to explain to my parents where I've been every second of the day. I have no need to meet with people I detest. I get to have a job, live with people I love and who love me, and I'm allowed to have friends who don't need to go through my parents. You make it sound like you were a prisoner. Lynn sighed. I was, in a way. Mother and father both came from money, but where we lived, we weren't the wealthiest and mother and father started doing rather outrageous things to make it look like we had more money than we did. They had ambitions, but they were selfish ones. She looked at the ground. And they tried to live them through Greta and me. Clearly, it hasn't worked, Jonathan grunted. He paused under some branches, grabbing onto his hat before it blew away. What did they say when Greta ran away with Wayne? Oh, they were furious. After father had ranted and raved for an hour, he said that Greta was dead to him. Mother agreed. Lynn grabbed at her hat as it threatened to fly off her head. Even with the hat pin, it was wanting to escape. I had to get Greta to send her letters to a friend's house, just so father wouldn't intercept them. The servants would have told them as well. After she left, they put all their hopes and fears onto me. Lynn had hated it. She didn't have a great relationship with her parents anyway, so when they started showering her with attention that Lynn had long given up on, she had no idea what to do. It was awkward and uncomfortable, and neither of her parents would stop. Jonathan was watching her closely. His expression wasn't judgmental. It was like he was understanding. Sounds like they tried to love you in the wrong way, he said quietly. Even above the wind, Lynn could hear him. He sighed for a moment. Money isn't everything, especially if the person wielding it isn't the most desirable of people. You talk as if you know from experience. Lynn stared at him. Do you come from money as well? Yes. Jonathan didn't look too happy about it. He looked away. My father's family owns most of Illinois. It's not something I'm proud of. We didn't have to work for our money, everyone else made it for us. I wouldn't have minded that, but my father paid them as little as he could. Lynn listened to this with some clarity growing. Jonathan understood a lot more than she expected. He had been there, and it had pained him. Lynn could see it in his eyes. What did they say when you said you wanted to work? My parents were shocked. Jonathan shook his head. They told me I didn't need to work, and teaching was the worst choice they could think of. But I stood firm. So, they threw me out with just the clothes on my back. Lynn thought she and Greta had struggled with their parents and their behavior. She had no idea. She stared at him. They threw you out because you wanted to work? I know, I have a strange family. I won't argue with that. Lynn could feel her hat straining to take flight, so she took the hat pin out and then her hat off, sticking the pin through it. Was that what made you come out here? That was another reason I was thrown out. Because I wanted to do something that was nothing to do with the family business. Maybe, if I thought it was a fair business, would have worked in it. That's not good of me to say, is it? Jonathan shrugged. I haven't spoken to any of my family in the last 7 years. He said it flippantly, but there was a tinge of sadness there. He was still hurting, despite it all. Lynn wanted to reach out and hug him. I'm sorry. They stopped and turned to face each other. Don't be. It was probably for the best. Life out here can be hard, but it's fulfilling. I make a difference and I do it for a fair wage. People out here have hope and a future. If I can educate the children, then they will have even more choice, more of a future. What could be better? I so agree, Lynn said, and she found she was a little breathless at his vision. Jonathan reached out and brushed Lynn's hair from her eyes. His fingers, in spite of the cold, were very warm. Lynn lost the power of speech. Her breathing quickened as she looked up at him. They were still under the tree, and now Jonathan was standing closer than he was supposed to. They were almost touching. It wouldn't take much for Lynn to lean a little more toward him. She had to stop thinking like that. But Lynn would be a fool to deny that she wanted more of Jonathan's attention. It was nice. Lynn had never gotten the attention of any man who was picked by her. Somehow, this was the first time it had felt genuine. She cleared her throat, trying not to think about his lovely warm fingers against her temple as he tucked her hair behind her ear. Listen, Mr. Davy. Jonathan. That voice. It was almost like a blanket wrapped around her. Lynn nearly sighed. Jonathan. She tried not to sound so breathless. While my parents made sure I had an education, it wasn't much. I think when I listened to you and Wayne teaching, I struggled to understand most of what you two were teaching. Do you think you want me to be your tutor? Jonathan was smiling. Lynn nearly melted at his feet. She nodded vigorously. Yes. If you don't mind. I know I'm a little older than your pupils. Jonathan laughed. You're never too old to learn, Lynn. And I'd be happy to do it. Lynn couldn't say anything. That laugh had rendered her speechless once more. Chapter 5. What were you and Jonathan talking about? Lynn looked up. Greta stood in the doorway to her bedroom, arms folded. A harsh scowl marred her pretty face. It had been a while since Lynn had seen her sister looking like that. She straightened up, laying her nightgown on the bed. When? Just before dinner. When you were walking back from the schoolhouse. Lynn had wondered what was on Greta's mind. She had clearly seen Greta standing at the window watching them as they came through the gate. Jonathan had held it for Lynn to come through. She had seen Greta standing at the door with a dark expression. Before they got there, she had turned on her heel and stomped back inside. All through dinner, Wayne and Lynn talked and focused on the children, while Greta sat munching at her food without a word. Her bad mood had all been about Jonathan. Lynn was a little bewildered. Why didn't you ask throughout dinner? I would have answered anything then. Because this wasn't something I wanted to talk about in front of my boys. Greta entered Lynn's bedroom and shut the door. I wanted to talk to you privately. Now Lynn was getting nervous. Greta was still acting strangely, and she didn't know how to deal with it. Moving away, she sat on the bed. You make it sound like we were doing something sordid. He was only walking me home. You saw us. Yes, I did. Greta folded her arms again. That was a very long walk. Lynn snorted. I didn't realize you had turned into mother since coming out here. Jonathan and I were just talking, that's all. You would have seen that. He's a very nice man. Really? Greta was mocking her. Lynn peered at her sister. She had had an inkling that Greta was a little off with Jonathan before, but she wasn't sure why. What makes you say that, Greta? I've known Jonathan for 4 years since I came out to San Francisco, Lynn. Wayne thinks the world of him, but I know better. Greta shook her head. I see things. Jonathan isn't known for being loyal to anyone, not even to his friends. He's broken up several marriages. Lynn almost burst out laughing. That sounded so ludicrous she couldn't believe it. Come off it, Greta. You sound ridiculous. In fact, you sound jealous. Then she stopped laughing as realization dawned. My God, did you and Jonathan? Don't be daft. Greta snorted. I've never done anything with Jonathan. But I know when a man is unfaithful. I keep away. If you know that, why haven't you told Wayne? He wouldn't be around someone like that. Wayne just wouldn't understand. He wouldn't believe it. Greta narrowed her eyes. Much like you don't believe it. Of course, I don't. Greta shook her head. She looked very disappointed. He's already pulled the wool over your eyes. I thought it would happen, but I didn't realize it would happen that quickly. I thought you were a smart girl. I am. Lynn stood. She felt like Greta was towering over her and it was intimidating. What's got into you, Greta? Why are you so concerned about Jonathan and I talking? We're not doing anything except talk. Greta stared at her. She stared at Lynn for so long that the silence in the room became awkward. Lynn tried not to fidget as Greta looked at her with unblinking eyes. When she spoke, Lynn jumped. I believe you, Greta said quietly. For now. But I know something's going to happen in the future. And it'll leave you broken-hearted. Without another word, Greta spun on her heels and left the room, closing the door behind her. Lynn was left swaying in her wake. What had just happened there? What was going on? Greta was acting bizarrely, and Lynn had no idea what to make of it. She could only hope whatever it was, Greta would tell her soon. It was pointless having an argument over something they shouldn't be arguing about. Chapter 6. When Lynn had asked Jonathan for tutoring, Jonathan had been delighted. He wasn't about to pass up on such an opportunity. He would have to be careful, they mustn't spend too much time alone. That would be pushing the rules of society, even out in the Wild West, but this was one of the few times Jonathan would be able to see Lynn without Greta breathing down their necks. She watched them like a hawk whenever the three of them were together. Jonathan knew why, and he felt very sorry for Wayne, who was oblivious to the faults of his wife. Greta was simply being greedy. And Jonathan's feelings for her had changed a long time ago. Now, he was rapidly falling for her younger sister, and Jonathan didn't want to change that. For the next 2 weeks, Lynn and Jonathan stayed behind and worked on their lessons at the school. Lynn showed that she had a good grasp of her reading skills, which blossomed when Jonathan worked with her. She loved reading, and her eyes lit up whenever she saw a book. Her love of history became evident. Soon she was quoting dates better than Jonathan had ever done. And her numbers, she was astounding. Jonathan wondered how much of an education Lynn had actually been given, because she was incredible. Not that he was complaining, the more time he got with her, the better. Lynn was not like her sister at all. She was genuine. You just had to look at her to know what she was thinking. Lynn was adorable with children, loved to work, and there was always a smile on her face. Everyone loved her. Jonathan could see why. He was still thinking that when Lynn finished the sheet of numbers that Jonathan had given her to work on. It took a moment for him to check and to see that everything was correct. And Lynn had worked through it very fast. The woman was certainly a quick learner. That's very good. Jonathan was impressed. You've come along well with your numbers in the last 2 weeks. Thank you. Lynn blushed. I didn't realize I was any good at numbers. My mother said women shouldn't pay attention to them as they're for a man to deal with. Jonathan laughed. I can see with you that this is certainly not the case. Right. He sat forward and reached for his pen. I'll write some more numbers down for you. I'll just get another book, Lynn started, reaching over for a book at the same time. Their hands bumped, and Lynn's knocked against the ink pot. It tipped over and Lynn jumped back with a scream as ink sprayed across the table, hitting Lynn in a splatter. Jonathan was on his feet immediately, running over to his desk and grabbing the blotting paper. I'll clean it up. Don't worry about the dress. Lynn was wiping at her dress with a handkerchief. It's navy blue. Nobody will be able to see it. Even then. Jonathan quickly dried off the ink on the table. Some of the books were going to be ruined, and then he turned to Lynn. Her handkerchief was stained with ink, and the stains were clear on her dress. There were also a few splatters of ink on her chin and cheek. This was too tempting to pass up. He approached her, stopping Lynn's hand and tilting her chin up to him. I think you missed some. You're not going to take this off with blotting paper, are you? Jonathan laughed. Not a chance. He reached for the handkerchief in Lynn's hand. Let me. Then he gently drew the fabric across her chin. The ink was already dry and wouldn't budge, but Lynn let out a sigh and tilted her head toward him, closing her eyes. There was a smile on her face, and Jonathan couldn't think of another time when he had seen such a beautiful sight. He couldn't stop himself from kissing her. It was meant to be a brief kiss and then he would pull back, but then Lynn sighed against his mouth, her lips molding to his. Her hands pressed to his chest, but she didn't push him away. If anything, she seemed to be tugging him closer. Jonathan wouldn't have been able to pull back if he tried. He encircled Lynn with his arms, sinking into a deeper kiss. Lynn's arms went up around his neck, her fingers sliding through his hair. Jonathan. It was the murmur of his name against his mouth that had Jonathan coming back to reality. He shouldn't be doing this. If anyone walked in on them now, Lynn's reputation would be ruined. It was very difficult to do, but Jonathan managed to break away, stepping out of Lynn's reach. Lynn blinked her eyes open, looking perplexed. She looked startled, her mouth redder from his kiss. It was difficult not to go back to her for another kiss. Jonathan dragged his hands through his hair with a rattled sigh. Lynn, I shouldn't have done that. Done what? The confusion was fading from Lynn's eyes. You shouldn't have kissed me. I should have asked you first, not just taken advantage. Jonathan was shocked to see that his hands were shaking. I'm sorry, Lynn. I won't touch you without your consent again, I promise. Lynn was silent, her eyes wide. Then she approached him, smiling as she cupped his face in her hands. I didn't mind. I liked it. Then she gave him a kiss of her own, a sweet one that had Jonathan leaning into her. He wanted to pull her back into his arms, but Jonathan kept his hands by his sides. Lynn drew back, her eyes shining up at him with such warmth that Jonathan's knees almost buckled. I think it's best I go back home and clean up. She gathered her books, giving Jonathan a smile. But I want to carry the tutoring on. I don't want you to back away just because you've kissed me. She wasn't running away. Jonathan couldn't speak, so he nodded. Lynn reached for her coat and hat. I'll see you tomorrow as usual. Then she was leaving the room, giving Jonathan one last look and smile before she disappeared from sight. Jonathan's legs gave way and he sagged into his chair. That he hadn't expected. Lynn hadn't pushed him away. If anything, she had welcomed his advances. Perhaps there was some hope, after all. Christmas was coming up, and Jonathan had a pretty good idea what he was going to give Lynn as a present. There was just the question of if Lynn would accept it. Chapter 7. Lynn could feel the tension as soon as she got back to Wayne's house. It had been building for the past 2 weeks since she had announced she was going to stay behind after school to be tutored by Jonathan. Greta had become considerably colder toward her, which had Lynn confused. But her sister wouldn't say why, she just gave Lynn glares and kept her distance. Though she had accepted her sister's warning, it didn't ring true and Lynn had no idea what was really going on. How she wished Greta would just talk to her. Wayne was oblivious to the tension between the two sisters, talking away to Lynn as normal. The twins were happy and enjoyed playing with Lynn. Lynn adored the boys. But every time John or Ronnie was around, Lynn and Greta came into the room, she directed them immediately elsewhere. Lynn wasn't sure what to make of that. Whatever was going on, Lynn knew Greta was angry with her. And she was doing exactly what her parents did when they were displeased. She gave the person she was angry with the silent treatment, and tried to isolate them. Lynn had experienced it too many times before to not recognize it now. Despite her animosity toward them, Greta was more like her parents than she cared to admit. After washing and changing, Lynn came downstairs and found dinner waiting. Greta hadn't set out a place for Lynn, which Wayne pointed out. When Greta didn't move, Wayne went to get a plate for Lynn and filled it up. Dinner was silent with the exception of the children chattering away. Wayne and Lynn were looking at each other curiously across the table. Neither of them could figure out what was wrong with Greta, but even Wayne was beginning to notice it. Greta ate her dinner and stared ahead of her, actively ignoring her sister. She didn't even respond to her husband when he tried to talk to her. Lynn knew the impending storm was coming. It was just a matter of time until it blasted onto the scene. After dinner, Lynn and Wayne sat in the lounge with John and Ronnie playing on the floor in front of the fire. Greta was nowhere to be seen, but as soon as Lynn knelt on the floor to play with the twins, she was in the doorway, giving Lynn a dark scowl. She sharply beckoned the boys to her. "Children, it's bedtime." "What?" Lynn looked at the clock. It wasn't time for the children to go to bed. "We're only playing, Greta." Greta ignored her. "John, Ronnie, bed. Now." The twins started whining. Wayne sat forward. "Take it easy, love. Now." That was enough for Ronnie to start crying, and that set John off. Greta glared at Lynn. "Now look what you made me do." "What did I do?" Wayne sighed and stood. "All right, fine. I'll take them upstairs." He scooped one boy into each arm, cuddling both crying toddlers. "Come on, boys. I'll read you two a story." Giving his wife a confused look, Wayne left the room. Lynn rose to her feet as Greta gave her an icy glare. "What was all that about, Greta?" "I wanted to have a private word with you, Lynn." Greta's voice was almost monotone. "And it couldn't wait." Something was going on, and Lynn could feel the cold shiver down her back. She squared her shoulders. "What is it?" "I want you to leave." "What?" Lynn thought she had misheard her. She shook her head. "I beg your pardon?" "You heard me. I want you to leave." Lynn searched for a sign on Greta's face that this was a joke. But it wasn't. Greta was stony-faced. Confusion made Lynn feel as if her head was about to explode. "Why on earth do you want me to leave?" she asked. "What have I done?" "Because I think you're committing atrocities, and I will not have that under my roof," Greta replied. "Certainly not with my boys about." Lynn found herself giggling. This had to be a joke. But Greta was showing no sign of laughing. This felt like a strange dream. I have no idea what you're talking about." "I think you do." Greta's eyes narrowed. "Jonathan Davy." That was when the penny dropped. "You think I'm doing something salacious with Jonathan?" "Well, Wayne says you spend several evenings together. And you do come home late." "That's because he's tutoring me. We do it after school." Greta snorted. "You don't need tutoring, Lynn. Women don't need to be tutored." That sounded so much like her mother that Lynn thought she was working the strings behind Greta. "Unlike some women, I want to learn." Lynn shot back. "Who better to ask than Jonathan? You should have asked Wayne. From the way you're acting, you would have thought I was trying to seduce Wayne." Greta barked out a sharp laugh. There was no mirth in it. Wayne wouldn't know a seduction if it hit him in the face. It took him forever to realize that I wanted to marry him. Lynn had never heard Greta speak like this. Over the last couple of weeks, her older sister had got colder and colder towards her. She had changed. Lynn had no idea what had happened. Was this all because of Jonathan? If so, why was Greta getting in a twist about a man who had nothing to do with her? For it wasn't concern over her sister. "What's got into you, Greta?" "I don't understand." "I've grown up, that's what's got into me." And I'm concerned that your time alone with Jonathan Davy is going to make you the talk of the town. Nothing happened. But Greta was shaking her head. I don't believe you. Just leave, Lynn. Do it while the boys are distracted. I'll have your bags packed and ready for you tomorrow. You can collect them when they're napping. Greta. Out, now. Greta started toward her. Lynn backed away, and then darted around her sister to the door. From the look on Greta's face, she was willing to be physical to remove Lynn. And Lynn didn't want to upset the children. Even then, as she staggered out into the cold with no coat on, Lynn wished she understood what was really going on. Chapter 8. Jonathan woke to the sound of banging on his door. He stumbled out of bed to find Gareth banging on his door. Quickly dressing, he hurried over to the mission station. His heart was pounding. Lynn was there. Had something happened? Was she ill? And why hadn't she come next door to let him know? Why did she go all the way to the mission station and then send a message? Whatever the reasons, Jonathan knew he would drop everything to be at her side. Lynn was reaching out to him and he would be there for her. He followed Gareth into the mission station and they headed toward the lounge. Mary was with Lynn, sitting by the fire. Lynn had a blanket around her shoulders and was cupping a steaming mug in her hands. Jonathan was shocked to see that she was soaking wet and shivering, her face pale, her eyes red. What on earth had happened to her? Gareth approached his wife and whispered in her ear. Mary touched Lynn's hand, taking the mug from her. That was when Lynn looked up and saw Jonathan. With a strangled sob, she jumped up, the blanket falling to the floor as she ran into his arms. Her clothes were soaking wet and she was freezing, but Jonathan tightened his arms around her, rocking her as she burst into tears. Jonathan looked up at Mary, who was watching them solemnly. She indicated for Jonathan to bring Lynn to the fire and she stood, taking Gareth to the far side of the room. Jonathan eased Lynn over to the fire and sat her down. He snatched the blanket off the floor and wrapped her in it again, sitting beside her to pull her into his arms. It's all right, honey. He kissed her forehead as she sobbed. I'm here. Tell me what's wrong. It's Greta. Lynn sniffed. Her voice was muffled against his coat. She's kicked me out. What? Jonathan drew back. She threw you out? Yes. Lynn swiped the corner of the blanket across her eyes and sniffed. I had nowhere to go, so I managed to get here. But, why didn't you come to me? I was right next door. I couldn't. Why not? Lynn sighed. Her face was pale, her eyes red. There are apparently rumors being spread around about you and me and what we are doing during our tutoring sessions. I didn't want to ruin your reputation further. Jonathan didn't know what to say. He hadn't heard of any rumors, and the rumor mill always came back to him somehow. Nothing had been said about him and Lynn. So what was Lynn talking about? What rumors? No one's talking about us, and I would know about it if they were. Greta says there is, Lynn said miserably. She says that's the reason why she's throwing me out, because she doesn't want my nephews around me if I'm being scandalous. Jonathan had never heard anything more ridiculous. He barked out a laugh. Lynn scowled at him. It's not funny, Jonathan. I think it is. She's talking rubbish. I know she's talking rubbish as well, but Greta won't be swayed. You know what Greta's like when she's set on something, you can't change her mind. I know. I've been dealing with it for years. Jonathan rubbed his eyes. I can speak to her about this, if you want. Lynn was already shaking her head. I doubt she's going to listen to you. She tugged the blanket tighter around her shoulders and shivered. She seems to have something against you, Jonathan, and I'm not entirely sure why. Jonathan knew exactly why. And it was embarrassing to remember. He glanced over at Mary and Gareth, who were at the far end of the room. They were giving them space, but Jonathan still lowered his voice. This should have been sorted out a long time ago, but I guess it wasn't. What? Lynn frowned. What are you talking about? Jonathan swallowed. Lynn wasn't going to like it. Jonathan didn't like it. He looked at the flames, unable to look Lynn in the eye. When Greta and Wayne first arrived, they came separately. I met Greta first. She was sorting out the house, and I came along to help when she had some heavy things to move. I swear, I had no idea that she was about to get married. You fell in love with my sister, Lynn murmured. Jonathan's heart hurt when he heard the sad tone in her voice. He sighed. I'm afraid I did. Lynn was silent. Jonathan wished she would say something, anything. Then she did. She's a pretty woman. Jonathan took a deep breath. At the time, I thought so. It was 2 weeks of spending time with Greta. Nothing happened, he added hurriedly. Greta didn't act like she was about to get married, she acted like she was interested in me. Then she suddenly turned up on my doorstep with Wayne and introduced him as her husband. She told me that they had just got married. Until that point, Jonathan had had no idea that Wayne existed. And knowing that Greta had been playing both of them pained him. Wayne didn't deserve it. She led you on. Yes, she did. Jonathan rubbed his hands over his face. I haven't been so embarrassed or ashamed in all my life. If that's the case, why do you live next door to them, still? Because it's close to the schoolhouse, and Wayne and I work together. Jonathan felt like he was 10 inches tall. I can't fault Wayne for anything, he's a lovely man. We're good friends. But he doesn't know what Greta did. You've never told him? I couldn't. It would break his heart. I try to keep my distance from Greta as best I can and I'm never alone with her, but she seems to gravitate toward me. Even with her scowling at me, she doesn't give an indication that she wants me to stay far away. He held up his hands. I'm not being arrogant, that's how I'm reading it. I'm thinking the same thing, Lynn said quietly. She was also staring at the fire. Greta is behaving in the strangest of ways. At first she tried to put me off you, but there was something strange in the way she did it. Now she's saying my reputation is ruined. The sister I knew would have stood by me. She would have supported me and the sister I knew would not have led you on when she was meant to be marrying Wayne. That doesn't sound like Greta at all. You disbelieve me? No, of course, I don't. Lynn laid a hand over his. Her fingers were still ice cold. But I'm concerned about what Greta is up to. So was Jonathan. Greta was giving off very mixed signals, ones that were concerning him. And, from the look of it, they were concerning Lynn. What did Greta achieve by throwing Lynn out the house? Was this because she was scared about the supposed rumors? Or was this for something else? It was all making Jonathan's head hurt. Chapter 9. Having Jonathan there had made Lynn feel better. She needed a shoulder to cry on, a person to listen, and someone who had seen the strangeness and who believed her. Even so, Lynn had been shocked when she heard of what her sister had done. Jonathan had looked torn up about it. Lynn could very well believe that Greta had led him on. And yet the Greta she knew would not have done that. What had happened to her sister to make her change so? Long after Jonathan left to go home, Lynn lay in one of the guest beds staring at the ceiling and thinking about what he had said. Greta had an ulterior motive, and it was detrimental for Lynn in some way. Was she jealous? Lynn couldn't believe that. How could a married woman who had a devoted husband be jealous? The only way to find out would be to confront her. Lynn still needed to collect her belongings. She would go over after Wayne had left. He didn't need to hear them fighting. If he knew what Greta had done, he would have his heart broken. Jonathan was right, this would tear the man apart. Lynn rose after very little sleep just as the sun was rising. She knew that Wayne headed over to the schoolhouse early, and it was going to be a long walk to their house. Lynn arrived in time to see Wayne walking up the hill toward the schoolhouse. This would be perfect. Greta answered the door after Lynn had knocked several times. It was like she was trying to make a point. When she did finally open the door, she stood in the doorway with a dark scowl on her face. "What do you want?" Lynn took a deep breath and folded her hands in front of her. "I'm here to get my things. You said they would be packed. And I wanted to talk to you." Greta snorted. "Your bags are in the hall, ready to go. And there's nothing to talk about." She started to turn away, but Lynn darted through the door and into the hallway, blocking her sister's escape. Greta tried to get around her, but Lynn stepped in front of her. "You need to talk to me, Greta. You know I'm not a scandalous woman." Greta made a sound that could have been a growl. She looked ready to fight or run. "I haven't seen you in 4 years." She sneered. "How do I know that? And you've been spending far too much time with Jonathan. You know well that people will talk. I spend time with Jonathan because I'm in love with him." Lynn was shocked at herself when the words came out. She hadn't meant to say it, but it had just come out. Greta faltered. Her face went white and then red, her eyes blazing. "You think he will fall in love with you if you spend time with him? Jonathan's not capable of being faithful." "How do you know?" "Because you led him on when you first met him." A flicker appeared behind Greta's eyes. Then she was snarling and advancing on Lynn, her hands clenched at her sides. "That has nothing to do with it," she snapped. "You did lead him on." Lynn stood her ground. She wasn't about to cower in front of the woman. "Jonathan told me that you two spent a lot of time together in those 2 weeks, and he had no idea about Wayne." "He's a liar," Greta yelled. "I trust his word." "Really?" Greta sneered. "More than your own sister?" "Of course." Lynn didn't need to think about it. "Jonathan hasn't lied to me. He was upfront about it all. You could have told me a long time ago about what happened, and yet you haven't. Does Wayne even know what you did?" "Of course, he doesn't." There was something very blasé about her attitude despite her outrage. Lynn didn't like it. "You never said a word to him because this was your little secret. I saw the way you were looking at Jonathan whenever the 3 of us were in the same room. And then you changed when you realized Jonathan was paying attention to me. Yet you wouldn't tell me. Are you jealous or something?" Lynn had been taking a shot in the dark about Greta's motives. But then she saw the way Greta reacted. Her sister was momentarily at a loss for words. Lynn recognized it from when they were children and when Greta would try to stall for time before she came up with an answer for her parents. "That's it, isn't it?" she accused. You're annoyed that a man is not paying any attention to you. She half expected Greta to deny it. But she didn't. Greta cocked a hip and curled her lip in a sulky expression. She looked like a petulant child. Why shouldn't I have attention? She demanded. I'm a woman and I'm beautiful. I deserve the attention. This wasn't the Greta Lynn knew. She had never heard anything so ridiculous. So selfish. But you're married. Isn't that enough for you? Wayne adores you. You think that's going to be enough? It's flattering to have lots of male attention. Greta smirked. And Jonathan knows a pretty woman when he sees one. So, you wanted an affair. I wasn't married, and nothing happened. I just liked having him around paying me attention. Leading him on. Lynn felt sick. She didn't know her sister at all. And you don't like the fact that he likes me. I saw him first. This was going nowhere. Greta was acting like she had a right to Jonathan. It was pathetic. Lynn was beginning to see her older sister as a petulant little girl, essentially an extension of her mother. Despite hating the way they were treated at home, it looked like Greta was more like her parents than she cared to admit. You need to grow up, Lynn snapped. Stop being so selfish and focus on your own family. As long as I don't have to see you again, that's fine. Lynn ignored that parting shot. Greta just wanted the last word, as always. Turning away, Lynn gathered her bags and left the house, aware that Greta was half scowling, half smirking at her. It was considerably warmer once the front door was slammed shut behind her. Chapter 10. Jonathan went to work still thinking about Lynn. Greta had gone too far. She had no claim over him, and yet she thought she could get rid of Lynn. Didn't she want her sister to be happy? He had spent the night tossing and turning and had come to the conclusion that the woman was too self-entitled. Jonathan wanted nothing to do with it. He pitied Wayne having to put up with her. He was still thinking about Lynn as he worked in his office, trying to go through all the paperwork that had somehow piled up on his desk. Deep in thought, he looked up when the door opened and the woman in question came in. She was carrying 3 bags, which she set down by the door. Jonathan was immediately up on his feet. Lynn? Lynn sighed and shut the door behind her. She leaned against it, looking exhausted. What is it? Jonathan came around the desk. What's wrong? Greta is jealous, Lynn sounded resigned. She wanted to drive me away because she didn't want you to stop paying attention to her. What? Jonathan stared at her. She wanted my attention? I wasn't giving her attention. I haven't in years. I know that, and so do you, but Greta thought your presence in her house meant you were giving her attention. Lynn made a face. She didn't like it when you turned to me instead. Jonathan had had an inkling that this was the case, but to hear it out loud was something else. Greta had to be mad to think he would pay attention to a married woman. If Jonathan hadn't been close with Wayne, he wouldn't be at their house at all. She's a selfish woman. I know now. Lynn sighed. I didn't know her like I thought I did. She looked very forlorn about it. Jonathan put his arms around her and kissed her head. Don't worry about it. This isn't about her anymore. It's about you. And me, if you'll let it be. You mean us? Lynn was looking up at him with those stunning green eyes. Jonathan smiled and stroked her cheek. If you want it to be. Then Lynn's face broke into a smile, one that made Jonathan's chest tighten. She slid her arms around his neck and kissed him. I think great minds think alike. Jonathan groaned, hugging her tightly as he took over the kiss. Lynn sighed and melted against him. She was feeling a lot warmer than she had been the night before. Jonathan pulled back reluctantly, pressing a final kiss to her nose. "I love you, Lynn," he whispered. "And I mean it. Right from the start. I knew, only I didn't want to scare you." Lynn laughed. "It doesn't scare me." She kissed his jaw. "I love you, too. Then will you marry me?" Lynn's eyes widened. "Yes, would love to marry you." That was like music to Jonathan's ears. He hugged her tightly, not willing to let her go. And he had no intention of doing that. Jonathan had another gift planned for Lynn, one that would make her really smile. All he had to do was wait. And Jonathan hated waiting. Epilogue. Mary stood outside the church and watched as Harriet and Christian, Lorna and Matthew and Lynn and Jonathan stood in the churchyard surrounded by their friends and family. All of the girls were beaming. Lynn looking up at Jonathan with such devotion that Mary nearly burst into tears at the sight. Harriet and Christian wouldn't stop holding hands, and Matthew had an arm around Lorna's shoulders. It was a beautiful sight. Mary's heart melted watching them. 3 matches and 3 weddings. It was perfect and just in time for Christmas. The triple wedding. Gareth appeared at her side, carrying a sleeping Elijah. "I didn't think you were going to pull it off." Mary smiled and leaned into his side. "You didn't believe I could do it?" "Not really, no. I was expecting 1 wedding, maybe 2, but not 3. Gareth laughed and tucked Elijah into one arm, putting his other arm around his wife's shoulders. He kissed her head. "You certainly know how to work miracles. Are you sure you're not an angel?" Mary laughed. "I'm pretty sure." She was delighted with what she had done, and the joy she had spread was the perfect gift for Christmas. Mary had begun to wonder if she had been a little ambitious with giving herself such a big target, but it had come to fruition at the right time. All Mary had done was push the relative couples in the right direction. That had been enough. Now, she was watching 3 of her next 7 brides get married to men who were clearly devoted to them, even after such a short space of time. "This is certainly a perfect Christmas," she declared. Gareth chuckled. "I don't think Greta Cornell would say that. Did you see the look on her face when Lynn and Jonathan got married? It was like she had eaten a lemon." "I did see that." Mary already knew about what had happened from Jonathan. The man had been very honest about it all. She shouldn't have been so selfish. Wayne clearly adores her. I do hope Wayne knows what he's letting himself in for. Oh, he will. Wayne's smarter than people think he is. Mary looked at the 4 remaining women mingling with the rest of the wedding guests. All of them looked radiant and had beaming smiles. Now, on to the other 4. Oh, dear Lord. What are you going to do now? Get them all married on New Year's Day? Mary prodded him in the side. "You're overestimating my powers of matchmaking. I'm not that good. But I'm looking forward to seeing them matched up. And playing detective." "What do you mean?" Mary looked up at her husband. "Gareth? What do you mean?" Forget it." Gareth shook his head. "Forget I said anything." "No, don't stop now." Mary turned to him. "What did you mean by that?" Gareth sighed. "I didn't want to mention anything, but something's not quite right with those 4. They're hiding something, but I don't know what, and I don't know if it will be detrimental to their chances of making good matches. Mary was surprised. Gareth wasn't normally that observant. You noticed that as well, did you? I'm not completely blind. I do have my uses. Mary giggled and kissed her husband's cheek. Well, I'm sure it will all come out soon. As long as you don't start something you can't stop, Gareth warned. I know what you're like. I won't. Mary rested her head on Gareth's shoulder. Don't you worry. He turned to her and kissed her lips. Happy Christmas, my love. That was another wonderful Christmas present. Happy Christmas. Thank you for listening to A Christmas Bride for the Teacher, part of the Hearts and Hands Mail Order Bride Agency series by Indiana Wake and Belle Fiffer. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to subscribe to Indiana Wake's YouTube channel so you don't miss more free audiobooks, new releases, and upcoming stories. Thank you for listening.